Hello, let's get started. New video.
I sat at my desk, staring at the clock on the wall. Time seemed to have slowed down, but the minutes kept slipping away, one by one. The assignment deadline was just a few hours away, and I hadn't even started. It wasn't the first time. In fact, it seemed to be a pattern in my life. No matter how important the task was, no matter how much pressure I was under, I always seemed to wait until the very last moment to do anything. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. The weight of procrastination pressed heavily on my shoulders, but it was familiar, comfortable even. My phone buzzed on the desk beside me. A reminder popped up on the screen. Your assignment is due in 4 hours. Great. As if I needed more of a reminder. Why do I always do this? I muttered to myself. The question seemed to echo through my mind, and I couldn't find an answer. Or maybe I was too afraid to face the truth. I had tried to get ahead of my work before. I had promised myself that this time would be different. But once again, here I was, feeling the panic set in as the hours ticked by. It wasn't just schoolwork that I put off. It was everything. Whether it was cleaning my apartment, returning phone calls, or making important life decisions, I always found a way to delay it. I would tell myself that I would get to it tomorrow, but tomorrow never seemed to come. The days blurred into one another, and the same cycle continued. I thought back to the last time I had tried to break the habit. It was a few weeks ago, a Saturday morning. I had woken up with the intention of tackling everything I had been putting off for weeks. I had written out a detailed to-do list, organized everything by priority, and even set specific time blocks for each task. I felt motivated and ready to conquer the day. But as the hours passed, I found myself distracted. The sound of birds chirping outside my window, the warmth of the sun pouring in, the quiet hum of my computer. Anything was more appealing than the list I had created. I told myself I would start after a quick break, just a few minutes to check social media, scroll through a few funny videos. And then, before I knew it, the whole day had slipped away, and I hadn't crossed a single item off my list. It was frustrating. I wanted to be productive. I wanted to succeed. But there was something in me that resisted. Some force, some mental block that kept me from getting started. I could never put my finger on it, and yet it was always there. That night, I stayed up late, watching videos online about procrastination. Everyone seemed to have the same advice. Just start. Take small steps. Break tasks into manageable chunks. But none of that helped me. Every time I tried to follow that advice, I would still end up in the same place, staring at a screen, overwhelmed and paralyzed by the mountain of tasks in front of me. The truth was, I didn't know why I procrastinated. Was it fear? Was I afraid of failure? Was I too comfortable in my routine of avoidance? Maybe it was a mixture of all of those things. Whatever it was, it kept me trapped in a cycle of panic and regret. I sighed and glanced at the clock again. 3 hours left. It was time to get started. But where? How? I opened my laptop, the screen glaring back at me. The assignment was there, waiting. I had read the instructions 1,000 times, but each time I looked at it, I felt like I was staring at a foreign language. The words didn't make sense. The topic seemed so overwhelming. I just wanted to close the lid, forget about it, and let it be someone else's problem. But I knew I couldn't. I couldn't keep living like this, always putting things off until the last minute. I had to find a way to break the cycle. But how? I took a deep breath, trying to gather some semblance of clarity. The clock kept ticking. Each second that passed was another reminder of how badly I had messed up. The pressure was mounting, but I knew I had to act now. I wasn't going to get anything done by just staring at the screen and thinking about it. I had to take that first step, no matter how painful it felt. But how could I make that first step feel less daunting? The task felt like a mountain, and I was standing at the foot of it, unsure of how to begin climbing. Maybe it wasn't just the task that was so difficult to start. Maybe it was the idea of failure, the fear of not doing it well enough, of not being good enough. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the thoughts swirl around in my mind. I thought about past experiences. I had never been this bad before, right? I wasn't always a chronic procrastinator, was I? I remembered back to high school. I wasn't perfect by any means, but I managed my time better then. Sure, I waited until the last minute sometimes, but I was usually able to get things done without this constant sense of dread. What had changed since then? The answer was simple: life. After high school, life got more complicated. College was harder than I had anticipated, and the responsibilities piled up. The deadlines came faster, the expectations higher. I felt like I was always just treading water, doing my best to keep my head above it all. But somewhere along the way, I lost the ability to manage it all in a healthy way. Every small task became an emotional burden that I didn't know how to carry. And when things got overwhelming, I retreated into procrastination as a way to escape the anxiety. But that wasn't sustainable. I knew that. Eventually, the weight of it all had to come crashing down. I opened my laptop again, and this time I focused on the assignment in front of me. I reminded myself that I didn't need to be perfect. I didn't need to have it all figured out right away. The key was just to begin. So I did. I typed out the first few words, trying to quiet the inner voice that told me it wasn't good enough. I ignored it, just for a moment. I could always edit it later. The first paragraph felt like wading through thick mud, but it was a start. And sometimes, that was all it took. As I continued, I found myself easing into the flow of words. The pressure didn't lessen, but the anxiety began to recede. With each line I wrote, I felt a little more in control. It wasn't perfect, it was far from it, but it was progress. And progress was all I needed. I looked at the clock again. An hour had passed. It wasn't much, but I had made real headway. The fear of failure that had paralyzed me earlier seemed a little smaller now. I still had a long way to go, but I was on the right track. I just had to keep going. I thought back to all the times I had procrastinated in the past, when I had let the fear win. Those moments always led to regret. But this time, maybe it would be different. Maybe, just maybe, I could change the pattern. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't overwhelmed by the task in front of me. It was still big, still intimidating, but now it felt manageable. One step at a time, one word at a time. The clock on the wall ticked on, but I had a new sense of focus. It was no longer about beating the clock. It was about finding my rhythm and pushing forward. I realized that procrastination wasn't just about avoiding work. It was about avoiding the feelings that came with it: fear, doubt, anxiety. But the more I faced those feelings head-on, the less power they had over me. As I typed the last sentence, the weight on my shoulders felt a little lighter. It wasn't perfect, but it was done, and that was enough. I took a moment to sit back in my chair and breathe. The assignment wasn't the only thing I had conquered that day. I had conquered the procrastination that had been holding me back for so long. And while I still didn't know exactly why I had fallen into the trap of putting things off until the last minute, I now had a better understanding of how to break free from it. It wasn't about finding some magical solution or fixing everything overnight. It was about being kind to myself, understanding that it's okay to stumble, and knowing that even when I fall into old habits, I can always choose to take a different path. A better path. The clock was ticking down to the final minutes before the deadline. I clicked submit, feeling a strange sense of accomplishment. I had done it. I had made it through another one of life's little challenges. As I leaned back in my chair, I smiled to myself. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. And maybe, just maybe, it was the first step toward breaking the cycle of procrastination for good. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, almost waiting for something to go wrong. But nothing did. The assignment was submitted. The deadline had passed, and I had actually completed it. On time, no less. A wave of relief washed over me, but it wasn't enough to make up for all the times I had let myself fall into the same cycle of procrastination. As I shut my laptop and pushed my chair back, I allowed myself to breathe for a moment. I had made it through this one, but I knew that the bigger issue was still there. Why did I keep doing this to myself? Why did I constantly put things off until the last minute, only to feel miserable in the end? I glanced over at my phone, which had buzzed with a notification. Another reminder about something I needed to do. And suddenly, I felt a sense of dread wash over me again. It wasn't just the assignments or the big tasks that I delayed. It was everything. Even little things, responding to a text, paying a bill, organizing my thoughts for the future, felt like they were endlessly pushed to the back of my mind. And even when I managed to pull myself together and get something done, it felt like I was just barely hanging on. I thought about the advice I had heard so many times over the years. Just start. Simple, right? But it never seemed to work. If anything, starting was the hardest part. Once I was in motion, it was fine. But that initial push, that was what always stymied me. I tried to be honest with myself. Did I fear failure? Was that why I procrastinated? I wasn't sure. I didn't fear failing at the task itself. What I feared was being overwhelmed by all the tasks I couldn't keep up with. Every day felt like I was swimming against the tide, and the more I let things pile up, the harder it became to stay afloat. I didn't just fear failure. I feared the constant juggling act of responsibilities. The pressure to be perfect, to do everything at once, and the fear of disappointing myself. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that procrastination was rooted in more than just fear. It was a symptom of something deeper, something I hadn't fully understood until now. Procrastination was also about avoidance. It was my way of coping with stress by distracting myself from the things that caused me anxiety. It wasn't that I didn't care about my responsibilities. It was that I didn't know how to manage the overwhelming flood of them. There had to be a way to stop this pattern, a way to make sure I didn't always wait until the last minute. But how? I didn't have an answer right away. Instead, I decided to give myself a moment of grace. I was still trying to figure it all out, still learning how to break free from old habits. But just for tonight, I didn't need to have all the answers. As I sat in silence, reflecting on what I'd just accomplished, I felt something shift. I realized that breaking the cycle of procrastination wasn't about finding a perfect solution. It wasn't about erasing the past or beating myself up for every mistake. It was about learning to face things head-on, bit by bit, and being okay with the fact that it wasn't always going to be easy. The next day, I woke up with a new perspective. The relief from finishing the assignment hadn't worn off yet, and I decided to take small steps in tackling some of the other tasks I had been avoiding. No, I wasn't going to conquer everything at once, but I could start. I could give myself a few minutes to organize the mess of thoughts in my head and prioritize the most important things. I began by setting a timer for 15 minutes. I was going to tackle a task I'd been putting off for weeks, sorting through my emails. I told myself I didn't have to answer every email right away, but I could at least organize them into folders and delete the ones that were no longer relevant. 15 minutes didn't sound like much, but it was enough. Enough to stop the feeling of being overwhelmed, enough to start the process of getting organized. The timer went off, and I was surprised to find that I hadn't just sorted through my emails. I had actually made a significant dent in them. It wasn't perfect. There were still a few I needed to respond to, but I felt a sense of control over my inbox that I hadn't had in weeks. I repeated the process with other tasks throughout the day. Each time, I told myself, I only need to focus on this for 15 minutes. It was a simple tactic, but it worked. Little by little, I chipped away at the things I had been avoiding. By the end of the week, I had tackled a number of tasks I had been putting off for far too long. Cleaning my apartment, returning phone calls, even making that long overdue doctor's appointment. Each time, I focused on taking small steps instead of looking at the task as one giant obstacle. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of hesitation, times when I felt the urge to put things off. But with every small success, I gained a bit more confidence. Maybe I couldn't change everything at once, but I could change the way I approached things. I knew I still had a long way to go. Procrastination wasn't something that could be eliminated overnight, but I was starting to understand why I did it and how I could start shifting my mindset. It wasn't about perfection, it was about progress, and that felt like a victory in itself.